Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 5th of January of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important and the most interesting updates are coming from the Suja direction, where, according to information we have, the Ukrainians launch another offensive operation. I believe that today you have already seen a lot of videos, lots of articles, lots of different things that describe the situation in the Suja direction. But before we start discussing the situation, every single post in details, I would like to give you my own opinion. According to my understanding of the situation, the Ukrainian offensive operation in the direction of Большое Солдатское is another suicide operation where the Ukrainians most likely would be completely defeated. They would lose significant number of armored vehicles and servicemen. But the most important thing is that most likely the Ukrainians understand this as well. And something tells me that Ukrainians don't have their goal or the task to take under control all the settlements. They have completely different goals, completely different tasks, and we will try to discuss them during this episode when talking about the Suja direction. Once again, for the previous several weeks we've been discussing a lot the possible Ukrainian offensive operation, but I thought and I suppose that Ukrainians most likely would attack the Russians in the area of Bryansk region, maybe the Ukrainians would attack the city of Belgorod, or maybe the Ukrainians will make another attempt to take under control Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. But according to information we have, the Ukrainians chose the most easiest way to attack or to continue their offensive operation in the Suja direction, and the Russians are saying that the most important target for the Ukrainians is to restore control over the territories they lost during the Russian counterattacks. Now let's discuss in details. Today, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation provided us some details about Ukraine attack. The Russians are saying that at around 9 a.m. of Moscow time, in order to stop the Russian offensive in the Kursk direction, the Ukrainians launched their own offensive. And during that attack at 9 a.m., the Ukrainians used up to 2 tanks, several vehicles, engineering equipment, and 12 armored fighting vehicles with paratroopers, with stormtroopers. And the most important target and the main task for the Ukrainians at 9 a.m. was to take under control the village of Berdyn. And now let's discuss whether the Ukrainians managed to do this or not. Somewhere at 10 a.m. we start receiving first geolocations, first maps, first arrows published by different mappers, different sources. And according to information we have, somewhere by 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. of Moscow time, of Ukrainian time, the Ukrainians indeed managed to reach the outskirts of the settlement of Berdyn. And later, somewhere at 10-11 a.m., we start receiving first videos with Ukrainian convoys. For example, this is the first picture that was published by the Russian sources, and in this picture we can see at least 4 Ukrainian vehicles that were heading towards the village of Berdyn. This icon in this picture was added to the map softly. It's just very important, let's say, picture that we received in the morning to understand what exactly is happening. Later we got another picture that was also added softly to map, and in this picture, according to the Russian author, we see that according to him, another Ukrainian convoy was discovered by the Russians and destroyed, maybe with FPV drone strikes or artillery strikes. And later we start receiving more and more updates, and somewhere at noon time, somewhere at 4 or 5 p.m. of the local time, we start receiving more updates, and those videos were already geolocated. And probably this is the final video that wasn't geolocated by anybody. In this video we can see the Ukrainian convoy that has had the 5 vehicles that were heading towards the Russian positions and how the Ukrainians were attacking Russian lines. And later we got the first video, and this is the first geolocation that centers of the world managed to geolocate. And there are 2 pictures, and in these pictures we can see another Ukrainian convoy that was moving exactly in this point along this tree line. So summarizing everything, the Ukrainians were moving from the area between the settlement of Martinovka and Cherkasskaya Porечная in the direction of this village by the name of Berdyn along these 3 lines. Later we got another video And in this is already a video, first of all, and in this video we can see the Ukrainian convoy, and we can see these three lines, and this video was geolocated with 100% accuracy. The Ukrainian vehicles were moving through these three lines in the direction of Berdyn. As for the end of the 5th of January, we haven't received even a single video that can confirm whether the Ukrainians managed to land infantry on the territory of the village or not, whether the Ukrainians managed to take under control buildings or not. So we don't know for sure, but most likely tomorrow, by the beginning of the 6th of January, we're going to start receiving first videos that will confirm the Ukrainian presence on the territory of the villages or not. Some pro-Russian mappers have already adjusted their maps in Ukrainian favor, and summarizing everything that took place during the 5th of January according to different pro-Russian sources, this is exactly what the Ukrainians managed to achieve as a result of their offensive operation. So the Ukrainians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to take under control something like this. So this territory that was captured by the Ukrainians by the end of the 5th of January. So we are not going to change the map for now. We are waiting for additional proofs, more reliable proofs, and if this information is correct, if the Ukrainians are able not just to answer these villages and to dig in deeper and to repel Russian upcoming attacks, then we will color the map. As for now, we are going to keep the map as is because there are very heavy clashes on the territory of this region. So now let's discuss in details what was the exact and the real purposes of the Ukrainians. Maybe you haven't noted, or maybe you have noted, but during the day we got a lot of articles published by different sources that the Ukrainians managed to brought some very powerful electronic warfare equipment. So the sources were saying that Ukrainians start using some electronic warfare equipment that was able to bring down almost every single drone that the Russians were using to stop Ukrainian convoys. Just the drones that the Russians will use with fiber optic were able to hit Ukrainian tanks and Ukrainian vehicles. Regular drones were brought down by the Ukrainians with this new electronic warfare equipment. So a lot of talks, a lot of articles, lots of posts, and this is very interesting information. And some Russian sources published this video. In this video we can see the work of this electronic warfare equipment that, according to the Russians, the Ukrainians introduced on the territory of the Suja direction. In this video we can see how the Russians were trying to destroy Ukrainian vehicle, but some were 10 or 20 meters before the target. The Russian FPV drone operator lost control and lost connection with his drone. So this is exactly what the Ukrainians were using, and most likely, and according to my understanding of the situation, this was the main purpose of Ukrainian offensive operation. So we will discuss this in details. Furthermore, from the Suja direction we got another video, and in this video we can see how the Russians managed to destroy another Ukrainian tank that most likely wasn't protected by this new electronic warfare equipment. The Russians are saying, and during the day we got a lot of articles published by the Russian soldiers on the ground, that indeed the Ukrainians began using new equipment, and indeed they confirmed that when you attack these with vehicles protected by this equipment, you lose the signal. But the Russians are saying, but this sphere of electronic warfare defense is not so big. So the Ukrainians have new sphere of this protection, but this sphere is not so big, and if drones fly around this sphere, there is no problems with the signal. But if you enter the sphere, you lose the signal immediately. And this is very interesting and very important, because when talking about Ukrainian offensive operation, we see that Ukrainians decided to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. So let's remove every single arrow we have right now and the lines as well. Summarizing everything, we see that Ukrainians were trying to attack in the direction of the city of Kursk, deep inside of the territory of Russian Federation. So which means that Ukrainians were moving from the mainland and from protection, artillery protection, electronic warfare protection, deep inside of Russia. This is very risky and very dangerous operation, because the Ukrainians had chances and had everything they wanted to counterattack the Russians in the direction of Koreniva. In this case, they would remain very close to the border, and they will be able to stay protected by attacking along the border. But they decided to go to attack as deep as possible. This operation is very dangerous from any meaning. Furthermore, according to geolocations and according to updates we have from the Russian sources, according to information we have, the Russians attacked the Ukrainians in the area of Leonidovo, so in the direction of Suja. So we are adding like global arrows to understand what was happening during the day. The Russians were attacking from the settlement of Kurakhove in the direction of Suja along these two approximately 2 lines of attack. Furthermore, according to information we have and according to the geolocations, during the previous days and today the Russians were attacking in the direction of the central part of Suja. So, and we have geolocations today, that improves Russian positions. For example, in this video that was published by the Ukrainian side, we can see how the Ukrainians managed to discover the positions of the armed forces of Russian Federation in the central part of the settlement of and how Ukrainians with FPV drones were attacking edge Russian positions. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. So the Russians from these positions were very close to the Ukrainians, to the central part of Suja itself. And this is very interesting. And now we have some doubts. What was the main purpose about Ukrainian attack if they have fire in the basement? For example, to explain the situation with simple words about the Suja direction, we can compare this situation, for example, with construction of building. For example, the Ukrainians were building high-rise building, 9 blocks or 10 blocks, and at some point the Ukrainians decided to build another floor for the building, let's say 10th floor, right? And they started this construction, but they starting this construction while they have fire in the basement. So, and despite the fire in the basement, big fire in the basement, the Ukrainians decided to continue this construction. So, as you can see, there is no value, there is no target, there is no task for the Ukrainians to move and to take the territories under control. And something tells me that the main purpose of this Ukrainian attack deep inside the territory of Russia was to test new equipment that they got from the Western countries. Now let's discuss this video once again. The Ukrainians built their convoys completely protected by this electronic warfare equipment, and the Russians by the end of the 5th of January published some statistics regarding the clashes that took place today, and they reported that during the day the Russians managed to destroy just 2 tanks. So according to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, let's discuss this once again. The Ukrainians lost 2 tanks, 1 engineering vehicle and 12 armored fighting vehicles with the stormtroopers on board. And from these massive vehicles, the Russians managed to destroy just 2 tanks, which means that the vehicles are armored fighting vehicles where stormtroopers managed to reach the target and then to return back home safely without any damage from the Russian side. So now the situation becomes clear to me. This attack in the Suja is not the primary target for the Ukrainians. In this area, the Ukrainians these days, today, tomorrow, and the most likely the day after tomorrow, they will try to test new electronic warfare equipment with the purpose to understand whether their electronic warfare shield is able to protect convoys while moving towards Russian positions. And most likely today, the Ukrainians managed to receive answer to this question, and most likely the answer is yes. The Ukrainians indeed managed to find a solution how to suppress any Russian drone, and not to allow them to attack them. But the Russians have new drones with fiber optic technology, but the Russians they don't have thousands of these drones. They just have maybe hundreds or maybe several hundreds, and that's it. And this number of drones is not enough to stop the Ukrainians. And most likely when the Ukrainians finish their tasks, finish all these exercises, they will begin the primary offensive operation, which most likely will take place either in the Bryansk direction or in the Belgorod direction, or the Ukrainians will try to attack the Russians on the territory of Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. So this is my understanding of the situation, and most likely within the next 3-4 days we're gonna see real Ukrainian offensive operation. Furthermore, And the Russians are saying that everything that Ukrainians began using on the territory of Suja is Ukraine old resources, old reserves, old reinforcements, and old military packages they received from the Western countries 2, 3, or 4 months ago. As for packages that Ukrainians received in the late December, on the 30th and 28th of December, that we discussed several days ago, these forces they haven't been introduced on the ground, and nobody knows for sure where exactly the Ukrainians are planning to use these forces and where exactly they're planning to attack. So everything have just begun. The most interesting things are going to happen between 6 and most likely 19 or 20th of January, before Donald Trump inauguration, and most likely Zelensky will do everything he can with the purpose to get better negotiation positions in face of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. The Ukrainians obviously will continue using this new technology, and obviously it will take time for the Russians to find a solution how to break this electronic warfare equipment, or how to improve the production of new drones with a fiber optic that can go through any electronic warfare equipment and to attack any target of the armed force of Ukraine. It will take time. It will take lots of time. Now let's continue and let's discuss the situation to the east of the city of Volchansk. Today we continue receiving updates of how the Russians were bombing and attacking huge concentration of Ukrainian forces in this area. Once again, I would like to remind you that according to our understanding of the situation, the offensive operation in the direction of Shebekin and Belgrade might be the primary target for the armed forces of Ukraine. And the main target for the Ukrainians is to shorten the distance between the city of Belgrade itself and edge Ukraine artillery positions. The Ukrainians just want to start bombing and attacking the city of Belgrade with artillery, and this will give them better negotiation positions, more powerful negotiation positions with the Russians. As for the northern and the Kupiansk direction itself, during the previous 24 hours, we got lots of videos of how the Russians were withdrawing the Ukrainians, but without any changes on the ground. The Sivers direction, we start receiving lots of updates from the area of Verkhnykamensk. The Russians during the previous 24 hours attacked the Ukrainian forces with FPV drones. The Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainians with artillery forces, and something tell us that most likely the Russians are about to begin another offensive operation in the direction of the city of Siversk. This offensive is not going to start tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, obviously in 2-3 weeks, but the Russians are doing everything to prepare this offensive by attacking Ukrainian positions and Ukrainian forces on the ground. As for the city of Chasiv Yar, the Russians stopped their offensive in the northern part. The situation here is very difficult, but the Russians managed to get their main objectives here. They managed to cut the stronghold of the city of Chasiv Yar from the north, and basically this part of the cauldron was closed by the Russians. Now the Russians are trying to improve their positions from the southern part, and the main purpose from this direction is to answer the city of Chasiv Yar from the south. The first target is to answer the city, the street of Tsalkovskого, and then to move further in the direction of the street of Konstantinovska. If the Russians are able to take these two streets under complete control, then this is going to be another cauldron for the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the city of Chasiv Yar. But from the other side, the Ukrainians are counter-attacking, and according to information that we have, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal, and during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians managed to restore significant number of positions on the Ukrainian side of canal, and are continue advancing further towards the N32 road. We expect that during the next 48-72 hours, there are going to be very heavy clashes, and the main purpose of these clashes is to slow down the Russians and not to allow them to finish the creation of cauldron over the Ukrainians, for Ukrainians that are located on the territory of the industrial zone of the city of Chasiv Yar. As for the Terez direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just several FPV drone attacks along the line of combat contact without any changes on the ground. Is the Pokrovsk direction. The most important updates from the Pokrovsk direction are coming from the village of Vozdvizhenka. I'll remind you that several days ago the Russians reported that as a result of offensive operation they managed to establish complete control over the village of Vozdvizhenka, and that was obviously very powerful and very important progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation. We were talking a lot that the main idea and the main purpose of the Russians is to cut N32 road between the city of Pokrovsk and the city of Konstantinovka, and today we start receiving additional updates of Russian progress on the ground. So once again, by the 1st of January, we have adjusted the map in Vozdvizhenka. Then the Russians improved their positions along the flanks, and then the Russians managed to take additional territories. And today, by the end of the 5th of January, we know for sure that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to answer the settlement of Yelizavetovka. There was very heavy clashes. There were very heavy clashes between the Ukrainians and the Russians. In this video, we can see how the Russians were attacking Ukrainian positions using 2 tanks and 2 fighting infantry vehicles with stormtroopers on board. We see how 2 Russian tanks were entering the village of Yelizavetovka, but most likely they didn't expect that they would be met by the Ukrainian vehicles that were moving towards them. And in this moment, in this episode, we can see close combat between the Russians and the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians attacked the Russians several times, but they missed. And the Russians, as a result of second attack or third strike, managed to destroy the first Ukrainian tank. We see this. The second Ukrainian tank managed to escape the battle and to retreat towards more reliable positions. But the Russians called for reinforcement. And in the final part of the video, we can see how the Russians were actively droning and attacking Ukrainian tanks in the same area. Most likely the village of Yelizavetovka was captured and secured by the Russians completely by the end of the 5th of January, but as for now we have just the video that confirms that the Russians entered the territory of the settlement. So now we see the entire picture. The Russians are planning to cut N32 road and to take as many as possible villages in this area. We've been discussing just the situation. We have finished discussing the situation on the western flank, and according to different mappers, the Russians also managed to improve their positions on the eastern flank. As a result of offensive operation, the Russians took under control several tree lines. So once again, most likely by the end of January or by the end of February, the Russians will try to take under control everything that is located inside of this red line, which will allow the Russians to outflank the city of Pokrovsk and to begin offensive operation towards the city of Konstantinovka from behind. As you can see, when talking about the city of Konstantinovka, the main defense belts are located on the eastern side of the settlement, and there are almost nothing from the western side. If the Russians are able to break through the Ukrainian defense belt as a result of fast lightning attack, then the city of Konstantinovka may be abandoned by the Ukrainians without any resistance. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. As for the city of Pokrovsk, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just regular activities and lots of Russian FPV drone attacks on Ukrainian vehicles in this area. This is one of the episodes of use of new Russian drones with fiber optic, and as a result of attack, we see that the vehicle was destroyed. And if the Russians can increase the production of this type of drones, they will not afraid of any electronic warfare equipment that Ukrainians use on the territory of the Suja direction. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Dnieper area. Today the Russian sources published the video of how they were storming the village of Petropavlovka. In this video that was published by the 114th Brigade, we can see the process how the Russians were attacking the settlement, and in the final part of the video we can see how the Russian soldier was raising the flag in the central part of the settlement, which means complete control over this territory. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor. After the fall of Petropavlovka, the Russians intensified their activity in the fields between the settlement of Ukrainka, Novoandriivka and the settlement of Andriivka itself. So the Russians are advancing in this area, and most likely during the next several weeks the Russians will try to improve their positions and maintain the line of combat contact along this red line. So everything in this red line will be captured by the Russians within the next 2 or 3 weeks, and this will allow the Russians to begin the outflanking operation of the Andriivka fortified area. As for the Kurakhove direction, the Russians also continue offensive operation. Today we got another video from the most western part of the settlement, but we still have haven't received even a single report from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation regarding this territory, so which means that there are still clearing procedures on the territory of the industrial zone and the power station. But anyway, we are waiting that during the next several days the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation will announce complete control over the settlement. Meanwhile, the Russians continue advancing in the fields, and this information was confirmed by different mappers. So the battle for Dachny is about to be started. The Russians yesterday carried out very powerful artillery preparation. During the day, the Russians were destroying vehicles that were moving between Dachny and Ulakli. Most likely the Ukrainians were trying to evacuate wounded or to bring additional fresh forces, and everything that was moving along N15 road was discovered and destroyed by the Russians. So the situation is very critical in this area. The Ukrainians, only thing the Ukrainians are doing are suffering losses. As for the Velika Novoselovka, if you remember, yesterday we were talking about the Russian artillery preparation in the northern part, and we were waiting that the Russians are about to launch another offensive operation with the purpose to take under control the city of Velika Novoselovka, the town of Velika Novoselovka. But as I understand, yet the Russians haven't launched anything. Today the Russians began bombing the settlement of Nova Cheretina, Nova Cheretovata with artillery, with the multiple launch rocket systems, and the pressure and the number of strikes and the number of missiles and rounds the Russians were using to attack this territory to tell us that maybe the Russians are planning to cross the river of Mokre Yala and to take this settlement first. We don't know for sure. But right before we start making the video, the Russian sources published the video of how Russian drone was flying above the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of Velika Novoselovka and suggesting the Ukrainians to surrender. So this is the pattern of Russian behavior before any offensive operation. First, the Russians both drop some applications suggesting to surrender, or they use drones with dynamics that can also suggest Ukrainians to surrender. Due to the fact that the video appeared from Velika Novoselovka, we can make a conclusion that most likely the final battle for the settlement is very, very close. And let's discuss the situation in the Zaporozhye direction. We expect that some activities in this area as well. Most likely during the next 4 or 5 days something big is going to happen. But today the Russians are hunting and attacking the Ukrainian positions in this area with FPV drones. We continue receiving updates which confirms that this direction might be the primary target, the primary direction for Ukrainian attack. And the most important target for the Ukrainians might be the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. So lots of updates. Let's wait and see what is going to be next. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.